समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Very pleased to welcome Professor Derek Grossman, who is a professor of political science and international relations at the University of Southern California, and who's joining me live from Southern California. Welcome, Derek, and what a time it has been, right? United States of America has formally joined the war against Iran by unprecedentedly bombing the 3 key enrichment facilities inside Iran. So finally, we can see that taco is not tacoing. What is happening?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Swasti. It's great to be with you again here. And I'll just say that we kind of kid around about the taco thing, but in fact, some of this decision may have had a lot, or at least something, to do with that, right? For Trump to prove, in fact, that he's not chickening out on these types of big decisions, except the problem, of course, here is that this is the biggest decision of his presidency thus far. I don't think that can really be debated. I mean, maybe the tariffs, but I think this is pretty big. Could lead, God forbid, to World War III. It affects, lives all around the world. And I think that, this is the biggest decision of his presidency, maybe of his life as well. And it's going to have a dramatic effect. And so part of the decision may have been to show that he's not taco, right? Let's hope
that's why
it was, though.
Yeah, and that's why I started with that, because it was just, and it also somewhere reflects a shift. Now let's get to the more serious part, which is that Donald Trump really won his election on this premise that America has to stop getting involved in all these wars and these unending wars. And I'm sure there is a lot of kerfuffle back home about how the domestic, his vote bank at least is watching this. So we will come to that. But first, just help me understand, what is the atmosphere like in the US? I mean, how are you feeling about the fact that United States of America is back?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I would necessarily say we're back, but I will say that, it's very early on, right? I mean, all of this just happened in the last few hours. And so there aren't any polls out there that would show how Americans are feeling about it. I'm sure we'll get that in the coming days and weeks. But my general sense is that the United States, especially since the second war in Iraq, has very much fallen out of favor with any kind of protracted wars. And that was actually part of Trump's rise to power in 2015. He campaigned on ending, quote unquote, forever wars. And obviously he was able to win in 2016. Even though in 2020 he lost, it still was actually a relatively close election. And, of course, that's not the only factor, right, that's on voters' minds. But I think it's a big one. And for him to make this decision today, right, and have B-2 bombers, bomb different nuclear sites in Iran, that is really sort of like a backtracking on the pledge, right, to never engage in wars that could become protracted. Now, I think Trump himself believes that he can stay out of this war, right, that we bombed and then that's pretty much it. We got in, we got out, right? But as you and I both know, Swasti, that's not how the real world works. I mean, others get a vote, right? So now a lot is going to depend on how Iran responds and how we respond to Iran and how Israel responds to apparently a new incoming barrage of missiles.
So
right?
by the way, just I'm very sorry to just interject, but Iran has come up with the initial set of response. Iran has, launched some missiles only on Israel. I think they're still trying to steer clear of touching any US base in the region, in Qatar or in Bahrain, or even blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which could be potentially an escalatory thing. But please go back, and we really need to. All we have heard from so far is Bibi Netanyahu, who seems to be very, very happy. Of course, this is the high point of his career.
Yeah, well, for him, I mean, this is what he's been really looking for, across administrations dating back, I don't know, probably at least a decade and a half, maybe longer, right? And so for him, this is a moment to rejoice that he finally got the United States to step up and do the job that Israel could not do, or maybe could have tried to do, but wouldn't have been as effective, right? And why? Because the U.S. has these very deep penetrating bombs. Now, we'll have to see what the battle damage assessment looks like, especially on the Fordow facility. I mean, it's entirely possible that the operation didn't succeed, right, or only partially succeeded. And the U.S. may have to try it again. You know what I mean? But having served in the U.S. intelligence community for over a decade, and sort of being intimately aware of like how this process works, it's going to be very difficult to determine if it's destroyed beyond repair or not, or at least destroyed to the extent that it would take many years to repair, right? And it's going to involve a lot of technical means and human intelligence means on the ground, probably as facilitated by Israeli Mossad, because they seem to have infiltrated Iran at this point. For Americans to be operating there, it's pretty dangerous. And so we'll see how that battle damage assessment pans out over the coming days and weeks.
No, I'm sure the battle damage assessment is going to demystify a lot of things about this particular strike. But I think the most important takeaway right now, and I'm sure you'd agree, Derek, is that it's a political statement that you cannot miss from the United States about its ironclad support to Israel, and also a very technical kind of a support, right? This is something that, as you said rightly, it was very clear from the beginning that Fordow was actually essentially built to protect against all kinds of airstrikes, and Israel did not have the capability. In fact, nobody in the world has the capability except for this, for the United States with the GBU-57, and of course we are covering that, in detail. But just to sort of circle back to what next. I did hear what Donald Trump just said. He gave his first briefing, of course, and he made it very clear that he would now want to have peace. In fact, he used a phrase which until now was being used more in the Russia-Ukraine war, which was peace through strength. And I saw him repeating that. And he actually said very categorically that he would now like to go back to talks. But if Iran doesn't want to do it, Americans are going to come back. What do you make of that statement?
Yeah, I mean, I've always interpreted peace through strength as demonstrating that we have the military resolve and capabilities to pretty much threaten everybody into submission, right? And to not have to actually use force. Today, and I think that's what Trump meant too, actually, until today, right? And as we know, Trump's very unpredictable. He's transactional. He's all of these things, right? And what you think one day about him is maybe not what you think the next day, right? And so I think this is another a case of that, right? And I mean, look, he's moving the goalposts, right? If instead of doing peace through strength as I just defined it, he can now say, well, yeah, but we just did one bombing raid, so that doesn't amount to us actually getting into a war. It actually is going to stop a broader war, right, by doing this. And let me just say, he may be right about that. We have to see how it pans out. But if history is any kind of indication, usually when you escalate, right, or you get involved in something, the country that you do that to, they have the ability to respond, and it's usually in kind or over the top, right, which means we have to then escalate. And so I'm worried about a spiral.
Yeah, the escalation ladder, particularly. That's what I think we are referring to. Now, very quickly, let's just decode what Iran's options are. So Iran, I mean, I just in the morning, posted on X that Iran has, 4 options. One is that the regime per se, they could collapse. They could retaliate. If they retaliate, the question is where and when and how much. Or they could, have discussions like back channel discussions. And as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a lot of discussion in the US and in Middle East about putting a freeze on enrichment for 3 years and basically making peace. So not 4, but 3. So collapse, retaliate, or make peace. How do you think the permutation combination working out? Because Iran has to do something. The regime has to do some kind of face saving, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe that they would be bombed into submission and then say, okay, we surrender whatever you want in diplomatic negotiations. I mean, before we get to that point, if we ever do, right, I think there's going to be some sort of military retaliation. We're already seeing signs of it. I wouldn't be surprised if they attack U.S. military positions throughout the Middle East. And then, then that's really going to challenge Trump, right? Because if peace through strength actually is now defined as we get in, we get out, well, if Iran retaliates, then we're going to feel compelled to retaliate. And Trump actually said in his speech today that there are many other targets to hit in Iran. And this actually caught my ear, Swasti. I don't know if it did for you. He said, I may be paraphrasing a bit here, but he said, and those targets will be easier to hit than before.
Yeah,
that really, because the reports are that Israel has taken out about 80% of Iran's air defense system. So Iran, look, and there's no Hezbollah anymore, or there's remnants of it, and Hamas, has basically been crushed, right? So and the Houthis, they're around, but they're weakened. I would say that Iran has very few options these days to retaliate, and that may make it easier for us. I don't think this is good for the United States. Let me just go on the record and say that, because you said earlier, it shows the U.S. is back. Symbolically, yes, but in real terms, probably it's a bad sign, because now we're slipping back in to another escalating conflict, and in the Middle East, when I think we should be focused on the Indo-Pacific, of course. And I'm partial.
Of course, I'm going to be. I will come to Indo-Pacific and all the drama which is unfolding here in the neighborhood and then the subcontinent. Of course, that is the key area of interest and the key theater of interest for us. But just going back to what Iran's options are. Of course, the first set of retaliation has already come. It has tried to play as safe as possible under prevailing circumstances by only targeting Israel directly by some missiles. Okay, but when we talk about the bases, Derek, I mean, United States has, of course, capabilities and bases spread all over the Middle East, right? So there is a CENTCOM headquarters, I think, in Qatar. There is one in Bahrain. There's a United States base in Iraq, and there's other maritime bases as well. I mean, capabilities. Now, in my opinion, I would perhaps say that if at all Iran has to send a message, I think the easiest target there is the US base in Iraq, because Iraq doesn't really have other defenses. What's your take on it? I mean, if at all, do you think Iran taking that option? Just want to understand from you.
Well, I mean, so during my time at RAND and in the intelligence community, we focused a lot when we would talk about a wartime context. We focused a lot on, what does the country's inventory look like, which is not something you normally hear about on mainstream media, right? But the reality is Iran, or any country that you're studying, North Korea, China, Russia, anybody, right? They're going to have limited supplies of things that they want to use against their enemy, right? And in this case, Iran is naturally going to have limited supplies of the ballistic and cruise missiles and drones that it's been using to attack Israel, and also targets where U.S. troops are located, right? And so then you have to wonder, maybe they don't want to waste all of those supplies just yet. Maybe they have to wait longer to when the conflict really necessitates using those, or maybe they only use them against certain targets and not against others. So to answer your question directly, I think what they're going to do is actually to try to gin up some Shia militia type activity. And that's something that they still can do, right? That's one of the proxy forces that you could talk about the terrorist groups, but the Shia militia, which I think is maybe a step down from terrorist groups, right? But still extremists nonetheless, they are more than willing to wreak havoc in a country like Iraq, where it's actually majority Shia, or a country like Bahrain, right? Where we also majority Shia, where we have U.S. forces present. And so I feel like those are some of the easy things for them to do, which makes, but I'm running the risk of mirror imaging here. What would I do if I were them? Well, that's probably what I would do, but that may not be how they play their hand.
Yeah. And this is just for the benefit of the viewers that apart from the three well-known proxies, which is, Hamas, Houthis, and Hezbollah's, Iran also has these, militant groups. And this is what Derek is referring to, just in case, right? Not many probably would have that background. Now, let's just open this up. Iran has seldom been in this moment of strategic loneliness, right? I mean, nobody came to its support. Russia, not in a position to do so, completely focused on Ukraine, unable to win the 4 territories that they constitutionally announced as theirs. The fighting is still on. Ukraine has still been able to pull off elements of surprise, the drone attacks, etc. And Vladimir Putin also warned the United States to not do anything to Iran, or not to target, basically bomb the Fordow facilities, etc. What do you think? Do we even need to discuss Russia here?
It's a good question. I mean, I tend to think that Russia's quite preoccupied with Ukraine, and they want to get that right before, and right meaning take over the whole country and kill everybody and who opposes them, and that's horrible. But from their perspective, right, that is the key objective. And Iran, or frankly anything else, would be a sideshow compared to it, and that would actually not just distract but also divert resources that Russia, again, back to my point about you got to have the supplies, got to have the ammunition, right? Why do you think Russia is so involved with North Korea? Because North Korea has stockpiles of ammunition that they're more than happy to give to Russia if Russia provides technical support on their nuclear program, on their missile program, et cetera, right? So, I mean, I think Russia is pretty much a non-factor here. But we also have to see how it pans out, right? If the war deepens, if it starts to involve Russian interests more acutely, then it's possible, but it seems unlikely at this point.
Right. And do you also think there is a bit of a correlation, or just for the benefit of the viewers also, because Iran, that's a question that we keep getting, which is that Iran has also been a key supplier of the Shahed 136 drones. Were those drones still on their way to Russia? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I don't know the exact status of that delivery, but I mean, yeah, you're right that Iran was doing that, except, China can also do that and has been, so there are other players in this game, right? It's not necessarily just Iran. But I mean, Russia has to think long term about, well, if there is a protracted war in Iran, and then we can't get, either energy resources, or, I mean, Russia's got a lot of energy, but different types of energy potentially from Iran, different types of equipment that could be civilian and military use. They may have some serious concerns about it.
Right. A quick question on how this tension in the Middle East sort of benefits Russia in the short term, which is that it sort of pushes up the oil prices in the short term, at least. Do you see that happening? Because even though Iran has not really touched the Strait of Hormuz right now, but if you see the data, which is like the shipping, data, you see that the ships are already started to avoid, taking the Strait of Hormuz, anticipating some kind of a tension out there. So do you think that is going to play a role a little bit? Because, of course, the whole world is then worried about whatever goes on in the Middle East reflects on the oil prices.
Yeah, no, I think we're already seeing that, right? So, I mean, I just saw a report before jumping on with you that India, in fact, has in the month of June has imported more oil from Russia than it has in the past. And it's kind of anticipating that there is going to be this protracted war in the Middle East, and it could impact the Strait of Hormuz, right? And so from Russia's perspective, I think you're right that this could actually benefit them, because, I mean, they're under a lot of sanctions because of their war in Ukraine. But if they're able to still sell oil, right, to countries who are willing to buy it, right, and now there's no Iran or limited, Middle East presence for oil, then that, I think, plays into their hands. But it could also hurt them in a sense too, right? Because, I mean, they still have interests in the Middle East in terms of resource extraction and things like that, then they may not have access to. And so the street kind of goes both ways there.
Yeah, and also let's not forget that Russia did face a huge debacle in Syria, in Assad already. So as far as the strongholds were concerned, we did see a lot of disturbance out there as well. Anyway, so that's Russia. Now, before I open it up and bring it to Indo-Pacific, which is, of course, like I say, that our key concern, let's also talk a little bit about the regional actors. Where are they? Are they sleeping? I haven't heard from them.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's been quiet, but at
Yeah.
the same time, I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, are they going to cheer on Iran's demise when they
Yeah.
have to live next to Iran, whatever Iran turns into after this, right? They're going to have to live next to Iran thereafter. I mean, that's pretty tough. They all quietly want, not all, but the Arab Gulf states in particular, plus Israel, they want this Iranian regime to be finished, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't trust it. They fundamentally don't trust it. But to cheer it on, I think would probably be, asking to have more trouble with Iran later down the line. And so
Yeah.
that's why I think you don't see that. But I think everyone who follows us knows that there is sort of an alignment against Iran because there's an anti-terrorism or counterterrorism view that colors their perspective on Iran. But then also there's the Sunni Shia divide, of course, right, which I think plays into it. There's also, I think, the relationship that Iran has with, Russia and China is perhaps a bit different than like how the Saudis want their relationship to go with Russia and China. Like, if Iran is just going to leverage China and Russia for the purposes of fighting the United States and fighting Israel, like that's a bad thing in their view, right? They'd rather have Russia and China, especially China, there to help them with things like through Belt and Road Initiative, like, more like economic engagements rather than security and military assistance, which is what Iran is really after.
So it's a delicate balancing, of sorts, because I completely agree with your assessment that basically they want Middle East to stabilize, and that's and that's why every time there's a destabilization, it kind of strikes at the root of that strategic penury. That's how I call it, which is that they would want things to normalize. There was I2U2, there was IMEC, there was so many things happening, and then suddenly it was all put on a back burner in the last 2 years. So I agree that I agree with your assessment, and why I actually phrased it that way, which is that are they sleeping? Because in the morning I was trying to ask. Just to see basically what has been the European response and the European leaders, and I could not find any. And I asked a few experts there, and they said, "Oh, you know what? Europe is right now sleeping, so they will be back to it."
Well, I've been awake for a while, but yeah, I haven't really seen much response either.
Yeah, no, so it was just a bit of a thing. So that's how I sort of asked about the regional actors there in the Middle East. Now let's open this up to Indo-Pacific. And first of all, please tell me, what is this new love affair between Pakistan and the United States, particularly Donald Trump and Asim Munir? The famous lunch and all of that, and then Pakistan officially nominating Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace, and then Donald Trump goes ahead with this. And of course, there's just so much to unpack. So yeah, tell me.
Yeah, no, you could do an entire episode just on that. But I mean, very, very briefly, I mean, frankly, I'm appalled by it. I think on numerous levels. I mean, one is that Pakistan, I think, still has a lot of work to do in order to get into the good graces of not only India, but the United States because of its use of terrorist proxies to do things, against India and frankly, against the United States when we were in Afghanistan. Lest we forget, Osama bin Laden was found in Abbottabad, Pakistan. It's like a suburb of Islamabad. And they said they never knew about it. It's really hard to believe. So I feel like they have to, there's a lot of work they need to do, but apparently our president does not agree, and hosted Asim Munir for lunch this past Wednesday. And another thing that's appalling about it is there was no civilian government there. It was like a military leader with the president of the United States. It just didn't feel right. They also had a closed door meeting. There was no press opportunity. And it's clear that they talked about a lot of different things. And then, of course, government of Pakistan nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize right after that meeting. I wonder if maybe they're having second thoughts now. I know India, Pakistan was what they were nominating him for, not for anything with Iran, but still, I mean, it's, to say that this guy is all about peace, I think is probably mistaken. But I would just say that the whole thing rubbed me the wrong way. And I think that, I think Indians have a right to be perturbed by it. And, but it's actually just another kind of slight toward India since Modi visited, actually even before Modi visited DC on February 13th. You can go back to early February when the U.S. did deportations against Indian migrants, and they had them in shackles for 40 hours on an airplane and didn't even allow them to take the shackles off to go to the bathroom. I mean, this was like really, really despicable stuff, right?
Yes.
You can go from that to then, claiming he got a ceasefire done when that's not really the whole story, to now this Asa Munir situation. It just it gets uglier and uglier. And frankly, I think it's eventually, if this continues, I mean, you tell me what you think from an Indian perspective, but I think it kind of starts to threaten the U.S.-India relationship, trust in ties between New Delhi and DC.
So very quickly, Derek, I mean, of course, like you said, that we could do an entire episode on this, but very quickly, yes, if you ask me about the view in New Delhi, of course, it is unacceptable. I mean, and also considering the fact that India has been so much comfortable, relatively speaking, with Republican governments compared to Democrats, the narrative was that Donald Trump is going to come and fix everything. Okay. And lo and behold, and we've been having one setback after another. So this certainly has not gone down well. I do agree that in the long term, it makes sense for the US to be serious about its Indo-Pacific strategy, where India has to be a key player, not only for the United States, but also for the entire Western, bloc. But that's why we see that the kind of division that we see in the Western bloc, it's a very, very divided West. We've never really seen that. We thought that it was just on Russia, Ukraine, and now we see that on China, on Pakistan, on Indo-Pacific and everything. So I think it's a little bit early to speak about it, but of course, we are keeping a very, very close watch. But that's a discussion for another day. I'm going to have you back on that. But let me just also pick your brains as, because you've had so many years of experience in the American intelligence and you were, at RAND. Just let me understand. How does this play out? Donald Trump is not particularly very fond of his own DNI, Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
I mean, he's publicly rebuked her, publicly belittled her, and to an extent where I think she understood that she has to do some kind of a damage control, and then she sort of gave fresh set of statements saying that, no, the president is right, blah, blah. Does she have any skin in the game?
Very little, if any, at this point. Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is because of her statement back in March in which she said that the intelligence community assesses that Iran has not decided to go forward and build a nuclear weapon. They may have fissile material for a nuclear weapon, but they haven't made the political decision to build one. So now I think that was not necessarily Tulsi Gabbard speaking. That was her in her role as the director of national intelligence and representing the entire intelligence community. Okay. But you see, President Trump doesn't really see that kind of nuance and doesn't care, right? He just heard that and said, oh, yeah, she's wrong. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And so by dismissing what the intelligence community is saying, I think the president has put himself in some pretty serious jeopardy here, right? Because when you go back and you look at the Iraq war, the second Iraq war, right? The intelligence said that Saddam was building WMD. And so President Bush at the time, whether you agree with it or not, he sort of went on the intelligence, said they're building WMD. We got to do something about it. They could hand it to Al-Qaeda, which it all turned out to be nonsense. But at the time, right, at least they trusted the intelligence community, who were the experts doing this work, right? Yeah. This time it's different because Trump is just dismissing the IC entirely, not even giving them a chance to discuss anything with him. Right. And instead making the decision purely because of a political imperative, which is the president's going to look good by following on by hanging on the coattails of Israeli strikes that have already been successful. That's, I think, a really bad way to make a decision. Now, it may be the case that the intelligence this time around is also wrong, right? But the problem is the president's not going to have any cover anymore, right? It's like you dismissed the intelligence community, right? And then you went ahead and did something that had no basis in fact, right? I think, I think he opens himself up to a lot of problems there.
But that's typical Donald Trump. I mean, you could just sort of argue that his modus operandi and his methodology, when it comes to running the government and taking decisions, has seldom been based on real evidence or research. I mean, just look at the entire way he's gone about the tariff nonsense. I mean, that's anything but economic logic. So I think that's been pretty much the Donald Trump way. And also, I think this administration is, I think very, very exceptionally a kind of a yes man administration. So you have to be the yes man to Donald Trump in order to survive. And I think that's what we see unfolding. So my last question to you, Derek, on, of course, how do you see it impacting India?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of early to say, right? I mean, but I don't know, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like India, through its non-aligned or multi-aligned foreign policy, has tried to be as productive and cordial with Iran as possible. But that has also been limited because of sanctions, but also because of Pakistan's growing influence with Iran. Yes, they had the border issue, like last year. They exchanged some artillery fire, but generally speaking, the relationship has, I think, been better and on the rise. And that has complicated, I think, India's calculations there. My sense of it is it's not really going to affect India that much because as we've seen during the Russia-Ukraine conflict, India has said that both sides need to go to an immediate ceasefire, right? And, your prime minister, I think very admirably told Putin to his face that now is not the era for war, right? And so kind of steering this middle path and being not necessarily neutral, because your external affairs minister, Jai Shankar, has also pointed out, we're not neutral in this. We have a moral compass, but we also believe that countries need to solve this amongst each other, right? And in the interest of world peace. And I don't, India has so far succeeded in maintaining that policy. And I actually think has been lauded in many ways for it, right? Because when you take a side, then you anger the other side, right? See, the problem for India that I've always said in the Russia-Ukraine dispute is, what if it escalates well beyond where it is today? Then India is going to face a lot of pressure from both sides to pick a side. And I think that's ultimately an unsustainable predicament to be in, right? Could that happen with the US/Israel on one side versus Iran? I mean, perhaps, but it seems further away from where India's interests lie. India obviously has a very close relationship with Russia and with the United States. It has a much less robust relationship with Iran than it does with
Well, actually, the fact of the matter is that, when it comes to what is happening in Iran and, Pakistan's role, of course, so it is India's extended backyard. In fact, many of our, if I can tell you without sounding very controversial, but our Pakistan policy, frankly, and especially on the other side, actually depends on our outreach to Iran and all that. So whatever is happening there in the region actually is directly impacting India much, much more than what was happening in the Russia-Ukraine theater. That's one. In fact, one of the key theories, and which is pretty convincing in its own way, which is doing the rounds here, is that America's endorsement of Pakistan, and especially General Michael Kurilla's endorsement of calling Pakistan a phenomenal counterterrorism partner, was also to sort of make room for using America's bases in Pakistan against Iran if need be. Now, it doesn't look like that. And of course, that's one of the theories, that actually the courting is happening because of planning for these kind of scenarios. I'm not sure whether it really is the case, because I'm not sure if the United States is intending to do that. like we just discussed. But yes, the long and short is that it really does impact India. And India would like this conflict to end soon, the escalation to go, and all of that. So India is also playing its balancing role, but right now we are much directly impacted. And on that note, Derek, yes, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And as you know, we are going to keep coming back to you. And then, a lot of discussion will happen on this particular discussion, on this particular topic. So thanks for taking the time out. It's very, very late there in the US.
Mhm.
And I'm so grateful that you stayed awake only because I made a little request to you. So that's so kind of you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Swasti. Yeah, when you make a request, I'll be there. Thank you. Thank you so much.